I hope that he wasn't scared, that it all happened pretty quickly.
Wasn't just a singer. He was America's golden-haired country angel with a guitar. The man sold over 33 million records like it was no big deal, casually soundtracking road trips, backyard BBQs, and every "I'm moving to the mountains and starting over" fantasy since the 1970s. During this time, he got married to Annie Denver, his Minnesota dream girl, and their love story was a fairy tale. Until it wasn't. Now, the internet is doing what it does best, digging up old rumors and adding fuel to the fire. Rumors have bubbled for years that their picture-perfect love had some not-so-cute cracks. And now Annie, at 78, might finally be confirming it. So, what exactly has she said? Let's find out.
This is his latest album, Rocky Mountain High. Would you welcome John Denver?
Hey,
John. How have you been?
You know the song. You fill up my senses like a night in a forest? Yeah, a very lovely song that portrays pure and unadulterated love. But according to Annie, this song was actually written to make up for a bitter fight. But before we get into all that, let's take a look at how it all began. You see, in the early 1970s, America was a nation that was healing. It was coming out of the turbulent 60s, the division of the Vietnam War, and the cynicism of Watergate. The country was looking for something genuine and hopeful, and it found Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., the man the world would come to know as John Denver. With his round granny glasses, his sandy-haired shag, and a guitar that seemed permanently attached to him, he was the complete opposite of a swaggering rock star. He wasn't dangerous, he was delightful. He sang about the simple things, the joy of nature, the peace of the mountains, the warmth of the sun on his shoulders. His music was a balm. Songs like "Take Me Home, Country Roads," "Rocky Mountain High," and "Sunshine on My Shoulders" weren't just hits, they were cultural moments. They made him one of the most popular and best-selling artists of the decade. He built an image of wholesome, clean living decency. He was the all-American boy, an environmentalist before it was cool, and a humanitarian who used his platform for good. He was the face of a kinder, gentler America. He testified before Congress to protect the wilderness, worked to end world hunger, and was even named the Poet Laureate of Colorado in 1974. This was the man the public fell in love with, a man who seemed to live the peaceful, harmonious life he sang about. It was a powerful and incredibly marketable image. And at the center of it all was the love story that seemed to define him. His marriage to a young woman from Minnesota named Annie Martell. Meeting Annie Martell.
Colorado. It changed his life. He had the ability to put into words, I think, things that we all felt. He wrote Rocky Mountain High on a trip to Williams Lake during the Perseid meteor showers.
Their love story, much like one of his songs, started with a simple, charming hook. It was 1966, and John was on tour in Minnesota with the Mitchell Trio. Annie Martell, a college student, was in the audience. She later recalled their first meeting, seeing him on stage. There was an instant connection, a spark. He wasn't a global superstar yet, just a talented musician with big dreams. She was the girl in the crowd who caught his eye. In his autobiography, Take Me Home, he remembered the details vividly, right down to the flannel shirt, blue jeans, and penny loafers she was wearing. Also, in a 2022 podcast, Annie remembered their first meeting perfectly. He was playing guitar for a campus musical, and she was the girl carrying signs across the stage between acts. After this meeting, they wrote letters to each other, their bond deepening with every one. And after 9 months, John Denver proposed to her over the phone. At first, Annie said no, not because she didn't love him, but because a proposal over the phone just wasn't going to cut it. But John was persistent. A friend played matchmaker, He proposed again properly, and she said yes. They got married not long after in 1967, and they first settled in Minnesota before moving to Aspen, Colorado, building a home in the very mountains that inspired his music. By all public accounts, it was a perfect life. They were a team, navigating his growing career together. They adopted 2 children, a son, Zachary, and a daughter, Anna Kate. And John often spoke of fatherhood as the most meaningful part of his life. Annie was more than just his wife. She was his muse, his anchor, the one who kept him grounded. She was the Annie in Annie's song, a symbol of the perfect love his fans believed in. The world saw a perfect couple, living a perfect life in a perfect mountain home. It was the stuff of a dream come true, and for a little while, it probably was. The Birth Annie's Song.
You fill up my senses.
Every legendary song has an origin story, but few are as romantic as the one behind Annie's song. It's been told in countless interviews and documentaries, becoming a piece of music folklore. The story goes that in 1973, after a period of marital troubles and what Annie has described as a pretty intense time, they had reconciled. The fight was over, and peace had returned. To clear his head, John went skiing on Ajax Mountain in Aspen. As he rode the ski lift, surrounded by the incredible beauty of the Rockies, he was overwhelmed with emotion. The feeling of love, relief, and deep connection to his wife and the nature around him all came together. He claimed the words and melody arrived all at once. In the 10 minutes it took to ride the lift and ski down, the entire song was written in his head. He rushed home, grabbed his guitar, and wrote it all down. The result was pure poetry. You fill up my senses like a night in a forest, like the mountains in springtime, like a walk in the rain. The lyrics masterfully equate his love for Annie with the most beautiful experiences nature can offer. It was a direct, heartfelt apology and a declaration of his renewed love. Annie later recalled, "It was a love song given to me through him." When the song was released in 1974, it was an instant classic, becoming his second #1 hit in the US. It cemented his superstar status and, more importantly, solidified the myth of John and Annie's perfect love. However, it was basically the musical version of sweeping your problems under a very floral rug. Not because the love was fake, but because it hid the cracks that were already spreading beneath the surface. And just like a house with mold behind the drywall, those cracks weren't going to stay hidden forever. The price of fame.
Stage and selling millions of records. But behind the scenes, his mood had started to shift. Friends soon began to notice. Fans noted that his lyrics got heavier.
The success of Annie's song was a double-edged sword. It turned John Denver from a popular folk singer into a global phenomenon. There were TV specials, movie roles, and non-stop world tours. He was America's golden boy, and the demands on his time were massive. But the same fame that brought them so much success started to eat away at their relationship. The man Annie had married was a shy, introverted boy from a military family. He had a carefully crafted persona of endless good cheer. Keeping up that public image was exhausting, and it created a huge gap between his public and private selves. The pressure started to change him. For Annie, it was incredibly isolating. In past interviews, she admitted to feeling insecure and totally overwhelmed by his success. She felt her own identity disappearing. She wasn't Annie Martell anymore. She was Mrs. John Denver, an accessory to a superstar. While he was on the road, getting applause from millions, she was at home in their beautiful Aspen house, which began to feel more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. She was raising their kids mostly on her own, wrestling with the feeling that the man she married was being replaced by the celebrity he'd become. She stated they were simply too young and immature to handle being thrust into the spotlight so suddenly. John himself later admitted that the demands of his career and the time they spent apart were huge factors in driving them apart. The cracks were starting to show, and they weren't minor. They were deep fractures threatening their whole marriage. The unspoken troubles.
And I had her up on a counter, and I don't know if I still had my hands on her shoulders or around her throat, but just as quick as it happened, I stopped. Annie, I'm not going to hurt you. I don't mean to hurt you. I would never do that.
See, constant touring and long-distance love don't exactly make for a stable marriage. For years, people only whispered about it. But then in 1994, John dropped his autobiography, Take Me Home, and he did not hold back. He straight up admitted he'd cheated on Annie, not just once, not a drunken night in Milwaukee kind of thing, it was multiple times. The man who sang with such honesty about love and home was living a life that was increasingly disconnected from those values. The road became his real home, and the applause from fans became a substitute for the intimacy he was losing with his wife. Along with the infidelity, his use of alcohol and other substances started to grow. While he kept up his clean-cut public image, privately, he was using them to cope with the immense pressure and the loneliness of his life. Annie felt him pulling away. The man she loved was becoming a stranger. The partnership they had built was crumbling, replaced by long silences and unspoken anger. They even separated for a short time, which left John heartbroken and fleeing to Switzerland to deal with the pain. They got back together, but the real issues were never fixed. They were just smoothed over, another layer added to the facade of the perfect marriage, the escalation, the wholesome, gentle persona.
But I can't conceive anybody would think that I would hurt them. I'm not that kind of person. Yeah. And even within that, as I said in the book, at one point when she started wagging her finger at me, I'd laid the chainsaw down over here and we were talking. I asked her why she cut these trees down out here. They were as much a part of this home as the walls and the floor and the roof.
John Denver showed the world was real in many ways, but it wasn't the full picture. Beneath that calm, folk singer exterior was a deep well of anger. This wasn't something the public ever saw. They saw the smiling guy on TV, the passionate activist, the loving father. But in the privacy of their Aspen home, a different side of John started to show. As the marriage fell apart through the late 70s and early 80s, the arguments became more frequent and intense. The pressures of his career, his struggles with substance use, and the emotional distance between them created a pressure cooker environment. Friends and insiders would later describe a man with a frightening temper. He was a perfectionist, and when things didn't go his way, or when he felt he was losing control, that anger could explode. And this anger would lead him to do something unthinkable. The chainsaw incident.
And I didn't mean to scare her. It didn't even occur to me that she would ever think that I would hurt her. Yeah. Here I am standing with a chainsaw, and what else is she going to think?
By 1982, the marriage was over in all but name. After 15 years, they decided to divorce. The process was bitter, especially when it came to dividing their assets and the beautiful home they'd built together. The tension that had been simmering for years finally boiled over in an incident so bizarre and violent that it has become the stuff of legend, an event that is the total opposite of the gentle beauty of Annie's song. The exact details of what triggered the final explosion vary, but it started with a heated argument. In a moment of her own frustration, Annie reportedly took an axe and chopped down one of John's beloved trees on their property. For John, a man whose whole identity was tied to nature, this was a deep, personal attack. It was a symbolic act of destruction, and he decided to fight back in kind. He grabbed a chainsaw. He walked into their home, the home that Annie's song helped build, and went straight to the heart of their life together, the marital bed. He revved the engine and cut their king-size bed in half, but he didn't stop there. He also took the saw to their kitchen table and sawed it into pieces as well. As horrifying as the chainsaw incident was, it wasn't the only act of physical aggression that happened during their tumultuous divorce. John admitted in his autobiography that things escalated to an even more dangerous level. He confessed that he nearly choked Annie during an argument. John described the incident with a chilling lack of emotion, recalling that as Annie was wagging her finger at him, he grabbed her and held her up against a counter. He claimed he didn't know if his hands were on her shoulders or around her throat, but that he stopped as quickly as it started, telling her he would never hurt her. Regardless of his intent, the act itself was a terrifying line to cross. For Annie, it must have been the ultimate violation. The man who had promised to be her safe harbor had become a source of physical fear. While some have described it as an isolated incident rather than a pattern of abuse, it was the point of no return. The revelation of this event, which came from John himself, sent shockwaves through the public. John would later express deep regret over his actions during the divorce, calling it one of the lowest points of his life. But the damage was done. The love that had inspired Annie's song had curdled into something unrecognizable, tainted by infidelity, rage, and now physical violence. The divorce was no longer just a sad ending to a love story. It was a necessary escape from a relationship that had become volatile and dangerous. The divorce and the public narrative. The divorce was finalized in 1982, officially ending the 15-year marriage that had been a pillar of John Denver's public identity. In the media, the story was often simplified. John would give interviews, saying that the demands of his career and the time they spent apart caused them to just drift away from each other. It was a simple, no-fault explanation that kept his public image mostly intact. Annie's perspective, when it was heard, often echoed these points. She spoke about them being too young and unprepared for the tidal wave of fame that swept over their lives. She talked about losing her own identity in the shadow of his stardom. These were the safe, public reasons. They hinted at deeper issues without revealing the shocking reality of the chainsaw and the choking incident. For the most part, the public was unaware of the violence that had marked the end of their marriage. They just saw a sad, but somewhat typical, celebrity divorce. Behind the scenes, the reality was much uglier. The love had been replaced by bitterness. John went on to marry Australian actress Cassandra Delaney in 1988, a relationship that was also short-lived and ended in a bitter divorce in 1993. He wrote in his autobiography that his second wife had managed to make a fool of him from one end of the valley to the other. It seemed the peace and harmony he sang about so beautifully continued to escape him in his own life. He remained a devoted father, but his romantic relationships were filled with the same chaos that had destroyed his marriage to Annie. Annie's perspective. For decades after the divorce, Annie Denver mostly stayed out of the public eye. She focused on raising her children and kept a dignified silence about the most painful parts of her marriage. The stories of the chainsaw and the choking were out there, but mainly because John himself had admitted to them in his 1994 autobiography. They were his words, his narrative. Annie's voice was largely absent. Over the years, in various interviews and documentary appearances, Annie has shared her perspective on their life together. She has spoken about the deep love they shared, but also about the intense pressure that fame put on them as a young couple. She confirmed the origin story of Annie's song, recalling how it came to him on a ski lift after they had reconciled from a fight. Surprisingly, all her reflections don't seem to come from a place of bitterness, but from a desire to paint a more complete, human picture of the man she once loved. she's acknowledged that they were too young and immature to handle the sudden stardom. According to some reports from after John's death, their last phone call was an emotional one where they both exchanged "I love yous." When John died tragically in a plane crash in 1997 at the age of 53, it was a devastating loss. John's legacy and the enduring paradox. John Denver's life after his divorce from Annie was a mix of professional success and deep personal struggle. His second marriage to Cassandra Delaney ended in even more public bitterness. His struggles with alcohol became more public, leading to DUI arrests that caused the FAA to temporarily revoke his pilot's license, a huge blow for a man who loved flying as much as music. His 1994 autobiography shocked many fans with its candid confessions of drug use, infidelity, and domestic rage, shattering the squeaky clean image he had maintained for so long.
He was piloting plunged into the waters off the California coast.
His death in 1997, when the amateur-built plane he was piloting crashed into Monterey Bay, was a tragic end to a life of soaring highs and crushing lows. In the years since, his music has endured. His songs are timeless, loved by generations who may know nothing of his personal turmoil. And that's the heart of the John Denver paradox. Knowing the truth behind Annie's song doesn't make it any less beautiful. It might make it even more poignant. It's not just a simple love song, it's a complex artifact of a complicated relationship. It's a snapshot of a perfect moment of reconciliation in a marriage that was ultimately destroyed by the pressures of fame and personal demons. The song is both a beautiful truth and a beautiful lie, all at once. John Denver gave the world a gift of immense beauty with his music, a gift that still resonates today. But he was never able to find that same peace for himself. And Annie's song, his most enduring love letter, will always be a testament to that beautiful, tragic paradox. If his journey, the highs, the heartbreak, and the haunting beauty of Annie's song resonated with you in any way, let us know in the comments. What does his music mean to you? And if you want more untold truths behind iconic songs and the artists who wrote them, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe. There's so much more to uncover.